that has been promoted to this very day to cover up the real activities of the Whigamores and the unum sanctum operations and the doctrines of discovery. This is why you see whenever there was a case of Aboriginal people in conflict with their land, that that the hybrid Europeans set up the Bureau of Indian Affairs in order to assume jurisdiction over the affairs of the Moors who agreed to be called Indians to under the guise of retaining their sovereign rights to the treaties and to the land. And under that guise of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the hybrid Europeans would systematically, over the centuries, steal the land, steal the resources, and that practice has continued to this very day and is generally referred to as gentrification, i.e., there's the Whigamore parties and there's your politics that you see taking place to this very day. And in reference to people who may not understand the politics, this is why you see much of the opposition from the Cottonwigs, which you know as the Democratic Party, against Donald Trump, who ran for office under the guise of the Republican Party, who is also against Donald Trump, because Donald Trump has been operationally making efforts to restore the constitutions and the treaty enforcements. And this is part of the conflict that's going on to this very day. And it's absolutely Whigamores battling each other over the Moorish estate to this very day. So understand the politics and don't be fooled by people who are distracting you to other issues, including the fake race argument and the fake Black Lives Matter paradigm, which they've been using to pit people against each other and then conquer them after they destroy their own communities. At the time, I will yield the floor, Dr. Nair. Any comments that you have? Also, for any interjections of yourself.
Somebody put in noted the names conscience or conscience and cotton.
Conscience wigs and cotton wigs. Those are the two parties that have been disguised in the modern day, not so much disguised, but that you see for pretty much in the monopoly operations at North America, known to the general public as the Republican Party, which is the conscience wigs. That's CONSCIENCE wigs. And the cotton wigs.
It's written almost like conscience.
That's what it is.
And so are they implying
conscience
that they have more of,
meaning that the conscience wigs were the wigs that were more honorable to the Constitution and the treaties. The cotton wigs were among members of the Roman Curia and secret members of the Circle Church and the Chancery, who, in fact, were among those who actually plotted and succeeded in the assassination of Lincoln in order to overthrow the Republic.
Well, I think it is ironic that the what became the Demo Party was called they call themselves Cotton Wigs, when according to his story there was picking cotton.
That's what it symbolizes. In other words, now keep in mind, because people also need to really
a lot of symbolism exists.
It is. And people need to understand that one of the things that the hybrid Europeans were doing were stealing the Bonnevilles and murdering the Aboriginal people. You know, like a lot of times when people see pictures of
Bonnevilles with those small ships.
Bonnevilles were some of these places that you've been calling plantations that weren't really European hybrids. They were actually Moors on the land. A lot of times they'll show you pictures and say that those people were slaves.
And they
They
were the
were
owners.
not.
Yeah,
They were the owners.
right.
And so the whole history has really been corrupted. And it's unfortunate because many of our people have been following that line for many generations.
Well, that's why I said, they would once they were able to take pictures. I can see them coming through the various areas, and I'm talking about the Europeans, and said, "Hey, why don't you line up so I can take a picture? Oh, you get all the family together." And they all now they work their own
And some
fields
of them were just simply pictures from archives of families whatsoever, and then presented
as
in a
as a,
false paradigm.
because weren't there? I mean, I heard Scott McKay say that we're over 2,500. He didn't say melanated, but he said black slave owners
Sure.
during that time.
See, this is why now. This is back to Hammurabi Bay. See, this is the unfortunate situation that's happening at North America and what's happening in the world. By the hybrid Europeans, when they overthrew the Moorish Empire, and then keep in mind, we lost America before we lost Germany and Iberia. That must be understood. And the reconstruction of the history has to do with many of the hybrid Europeans taking credit for servitude activities that actually was reversed. Was not, because slave is really an identity of the Slavic peoples. Now it's been used connotatively in contemporary construction of history, but it is improperly used. It's actually Slovakian. And so the slave in general applied to hybrid Europeans, although it is used contemporarily and wrongly in history to as from a connotative perspective to designate people who have been put into servitude or into peonage. And so another part of the unfortunate result of reconstructed history is that the hybrid Europeans have been credited with a lot of criminal enslavement that was actually themselves not in reverse. And so, again, when people know the real history, the guilt of human suffering is on both sides. It's not like one-sided the way that they've been telling it. And furthermore, many hybrid Europeans, when held in servitude, were also listed as blacks and Negroes. That's another thing that's been misrepresented. And also, one of your largest, biggest slaveholders at the Maghreb or at North America was a Moor.
Anthony Johnson.
Yes. And it's and for us to fix this social economic problem that we have today, that's been exported around the world. The truth must be told in order for us to fix things. Meaning that if you're not honest about or truthful about the true chronology and history of the walk of man, particularly in North America, we're not going to correct anything. And we must take responsibility, all of us, for the enforcement of the treaties and the Constitution for the United States, which comes from honesty confederation. That comes from us. Those principles are Moorish principles. They're fatwa. And even when you hear people talk about fatwa, they'll talk it in a negative when actually the Constitution for the United States comes from fatwa law, come from the Moors. It didn't come from the hybrid Europeans. And people need to understand. This is why it's important for people to understand or to look into American history in context with the Napoleonic Wars, because it was actually during those wars as they took over the monarchies of Iberia, i.e., Europe. Much of the corruption that we're experiencing today, they've been using dark magic, Babylonian magic, to rule the world ruthlessly.
Speaking of dark magic and Babylonian magic,
Yeah.
I'm reading Synchronicity in the Seventh Seal.
Oh, Peter Moon, yeah.
Peter Moon. And so getting into it, I realized that dark magic was being used because that's what's in here, as well as Noble Drew Ali in here. So you got Ron L. Hubbard, you got Aleister Crowley,
All
you
of
got
those
Jack
things are tied
Parsons.
together.
Yeah,
You'll see.
you got Ang's Hatton Ashram.
Yes.
Y'all, I'm telling you about a book that y'all need to go and get so we can all talk about this book. Got to be read. But can I share something
freely? Because I want to just make this note with you, Dr. Aguilar.
Go ahead.
You will see. Remember, like Noble Drew Ali said, you're gonna make the European tell the truth.
Yes.
Now, and as we mentioned over the years, as the middle class of the hybrid Europeans have been thrown under the bus as true history starts coming about. And the truth about the Whiggamore Party operations, they just don't say Whiggamores. They'll just say the Democrats and the Republicans. Understand you're talking about the Whiggamores. Mm-hmm. As this comes out and all the corruption that has taken place on the planet system with Napoleonic wars, etc., they didn't expect to be thrown under the bus. And so they're starting to expose some of the real history. And logically, people who don't know a background, won't put it in context. But once you have some of the actual historical records, you can understand the Moorish Divine and National Movement. You can understand the motive of Noble Drew Ali. You can understand when Noble Drew Ali set up the Divine and National Movement and the old Canaanite temple. You'll understand the opposition coming from the Queen of England. You can also understand why the Queen said he is who he said he is, given what he wants, etc. You also recognize why the different nations of the earth recognize Noble Drew Ali, because they recognize the real politics. You'll understand the motive of the infiltration with J. Edgar Hoover and the COINTELPRO operations. You'll understand even more about the history in relationship to Noble Drew Ali when you really understand the actual history, some of which I shared with you. Now let's share with us some of Peter Moon's writing.
Yeah, so in chapter 35, because I've kind of like been bouncing around since it.
Well, you can't help because there's so much, really, right. And you try to give pertinent points to inspire the people to be more honest, to do some research, to remove their biases, to remove their hatreds, to deal with facts, and to come together with people from all walks of life to make life better on this planet for humanity, period. Which is the mission of the Moorish movement.
All right. I'm going to read, this is second chapter in, second paragraph, I'm sorry, chapter 35. After reading Peter Wilson's Sacred Drift, and I just ordered that book, I was a bit astonished to find out independently that Drew Ali was not only a real character in our history who not only appeared in the newspapers of his time, but has a substantial FBI file, the entirety of which has not been released to the public at this time. In fact, he was doggedly scrutinized by J. Edgar Hoover's FBI during the Roaring Twenties. Although he was by no means the first Black Muslim in America, he is believed to be the first Black Muslim prophet. It is not surprising, and understand this is written by Albion, okay? So it is not surprising that he has been obscured and forgotten by most white historians, but it is even more alarming that the majority of his fellow African Americans are equally ignorant of his incredible life. It will send the shock of ignorance through many people's nervous systems to learn that Drew Ali's murder was a pivotal point in history, which eventually gave rise to contemporary or recognized figures such as Louis Farrakhan, Malcolm X, and Elijah Muhammad. Although these characters are not known to have shed any light on Drew Ali or his heritage, they would never have risen to their aggrandized station in life had it not been for his legacy. Can I continue?
Yes, go ahead. Until you feel that what you've shared has context for the people.
Okay.
So things must be put in context.
Right. So Drew Ali's origins are somewhat obscure, and his life has taken on legendary proportions at times, but he definitely did exist. He was born on January 8th, 1886, in North Carolina. His mother was a Cherokee and his father was of Moorish descent. His parents are believed to have met and studied under a quote unquote master adept known as Jamal al Din al Agani, who visited the U.S. From 1882 1883. At this time, they were initiated into an Islamic sect known as the Brethren of Purity, an Ismaili faction from Cairo, which sought to preserve the knowledge lost from the Alexandria Library. Although Peter Wilson suggests Drew Ali may have been a circus magician as a young man, it is pretty safe that he was skilled in his trade. You can clearly see his influence later on in his life when circus style posters were used by him to draw big crowds for his religious gatherings. I'm not saying whether this stuff is true or not, but it's what he written. Prior to World War I, he visited Egypt, met the last priest of an ancient cult who took him into the Great Pyramid blindfolded. When Drew Ali made his way out unassisted, the priest initiated him and gave him the name Sharif Abdul Ali. On this trip to the Mideast, Ali put together a book known as the Circle 7 Quran. Upon his return to America, he became known as Drew Ali. In Newark, New Jersey, at the age of 27, he had a dream where he was ordered to start a religion, quote unquote, for uplifting of fallen mankind with particular attention to the Black race. He believed that Blacks are genuinely Moors who are descendants of the biblical Moabites and later inhabited what is now the country of Morocco. Although Ali's Circle 7 Quran had been picked apart by scholars and found to be largely borrowed from other texts, including the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus Christ, the origins and secrets of Ali's Moorish Science Temple are far more obscure and mysterious. When one studies mystery schools, it is wise to remember that there is usually an outward front, but also an inner circle that is much more mysterious and often revolves around a character or entity which seeks to remain invisible. By all appearances, Drew Ali was a kind and loving man who sought no conflict with white people. In fact, he specifically stated that whites, this is interesting, could claim the same status as blacks by declaring themselves to be Celts or Celts and therefore Asiatic. The Celts originated in Central Asia and migrated to the British Isles via Africa. The Moorish Science Temple was predominantly black, but was not exclusive in terms of race. Ali's purpose was not only to correct the horrible wrongs that had been committed against the people of his own heritage, it was also to restore the lost wisdom that they once possessed, which had enlightened the Western world for several centuries. And I'm going to stop right there because there's a lot more. But that right there is a lot. And the fact that, I think what struck me in that, one of the things, not
how much has been held back on the people.
Well, and that he has, as a modern European, feels like, his own people don't know who he is.
Right.
They don't know who they are, so they don't know who he is.
Yes. But keep in mind with the infiltration, when you do research in the FBI papers, you will see that many of the people who became in those periods of time, sheiks and sheikesses in the temple were actually plants of pastors and ministers, 33-degree Masons from the church, whose mission was to neutralize it because of the effect of the membership that was happening with the churches and the synagogues, with people coming into the Moorish movement from both of those orders, and he was considered an economic and political threat. So this is where you get also a lot of the activities of the great sellout that people mention but don't talk about, and that would be this is why we already know that many scholars who have that information don't share that information with members of the Moorish Science Temple, so they don't recognize the motives of many of the people who are also still governing within the movement, etc., and who have credible positions. But when you start doing the research, you'll recognize who's who by their activities and also by the lack of certain activities.
Well, I think the thing that I found interesting in here that this was tied in with this. Not just there's several chapters in here about Prophet Noble Drew Ali, but it's tied in with the fact that there was a lot of, like you said, sorcery. I call it sorcery and debauchery and so people like the Dianetics movement and stuff, which now makes a lot of sense as to why maybe certain people are their people through clearing via Dianetics, because there's some early back in the 20s and 30s connection between that nation and this kind of movement. I mean, I didn't know how far it went back. I thought this was just something that came up in the 20th century, 21st, beginning of the 21st century. But no, there's a connection that goes way back.
The interesting thing that when you're looking at this stuff from a position of scholarship, you recognize the important role that Drew Ali played in American politics that's not credited to the platform. And also the fact that much of what work that he's done is absolutely civic in character, but not credited as being civic in character.
At least a religious organization.
Yes, the affidavit. See, this is why it's important for people to look at the affidavit on the back of the questionnaire. When you look at the affidavit on the back of the questionnaire, you'll see that the Moorish Science Temple of America was adopted with the religious affidavit in 1928. And that, when you start doing the research in the FBI papers, you'll recognize it was a counter move on his part